which one do you guys think is should be the cover of Professor Sunday Salon? So today we are doing, like, think of it as beta testing his salon, that today is the first day. And I have like a whole bunch of questions for Minerva. And that's the reason that we gathered here. So we're going to be asking them question number one. Professor, can you please tell us what makes you want to pick this image as the cover of your Sunday musings?
So these are two images of what I think of as salons. And so the one on the bottom left is a classic salon, French 18th century. If I have it right, there's one man and many women in that salon, although when I look at it, it looks almost like they're all women. And I wanted to emphasize the fact that the original salons were, many of them, organized by women. Ben Franklin famously attended one, Benjamin Franklin, when he was over as our ambassador to France during the Revolutionary period and the immediate period after the Revolutionary War. And he was one of the very few men attending the salon he attended. Then there's an image of Lloyd's Coffee House in London in the 18th century. And there's also the image that you and I saw together in the Met Museum just last night of a Danish salon in Rome in the 19th century. And so this is a thing that's been going on for a very long time. It's actually really important to the history of democracy and the development of the public sphere. But to come back to the kind of value to us today, it's just a great way for people to get together, not just to like hang out and chit chat, but with some sense that there's some things that are important that we want to talk about. And so we're going to be a little bit more focused, although it's not going to be too formal. It's not a class, it's a gathering of friends and acquaintances to talk about ideas.
We see that there are some nice hookah pipes over there. People are smoking. Would you serve hookah over here? I know, no, it's a lot. I know, maybe.
Well,
a pipe may go around.
I think it's worthwhile noting that in addition to very strange pipes, they're not actually hookahs, right? They're pipes, but they're like 3 feet long.
Yeah.
Must have been the fashion of the day. There's coffee, right? Espresso mugs on the table and on the ground. And the same thing is true of the gathering of Lloyd's Coffee House. And in the French salons, they often served coffee or tea. And so I think the drug of choice for a salon is probably caffeine. On which note, I'm going to have a sip of mine.
Exactly. Yeah. What kind of coffee are you drinking?
I'm drinking a cappuccino that I've made, as you know, with our espresso maker, with oat milk in it.
Yes, that's nice. And
so, should I get us started?
Are
we started?
I like all the images, so we are already started actually. And I also think that the salon of the future is going to have an infusion. Like, I'm gonna. Which one was your favorite lecture, and which one was your favorite slide? It could be two different things.
Okay. Well, so I will go ahead and try to answer that. And so I think so. Today is Sunday. I think I've given mainly one lecture this week, and so I've given it in multiple settings and multiple versions of it. But the basic topic, and I'm doing actually a series on this, and I've got a grant that allows me to really concentrate on this topic from the Mellon Foundation. So I'm teaching this at Sarah Lawrence, I'm teaching this at Fromm at USF, and I've taught it with various retirement communities as well. Justice, care, ethics, and the lifespan revolution, right? And so it's actually a lecture series. I'm about a month into it, and that's I guess the thing that I had the most fun with this week. It's also I just think a really fascinating, important topic. I've intended to do this. I applied for and got the grant to do this to complement the work that you and I are doing together, Sophia, and to do some of the background for the long project I've got with lifelong learning, and also because my parents are getting older, as are yours. But now that I'm into it, I've discovered this is a really fascinating, interesting, important topic with just really good research, and I'm learning a lot. And so this would be the topic I guess I would spotlight for further discussion.
So, can you say a little more about the three things that are, like just a topic? Can each word in there in your heading can be a book in itself. So
Sure.
what do you mean?
Well, so let's start with the lifespan revolution, right? That's the central focus, and this is going to give me an excuse to go through a few slides that I have. And this is not rehearsed, perhaps appearances to the contrary notwithstanding. Human beings are just living longer, right? And so as you can see, for much of human history, the average lifespan was about 20 years long. A lot of that is because most of us, or around half of us, didn't make it to 10, right? So those who survived past their childhood often lived to 40 or 50, but 50 was very old for a human being until around 100 years ago. And then, as you can see, right, over just the last few decades, the last 50 years maybe, we've gone from averaging 50 to averaging 70 to averaging 80. And people born today are more likely to live to 100 than not. And so this is changing our lifespan. It's changing how much time we have to do whatever we're going to do on Earth. And so the ethical component to this, which I'll say more about, but the ethical component has to do with the fact that we have to decide, okay, wait, I used to think, 67 was old. That's when I'm going to start winding things down. It may be that I'll have a third of my life still left to lead when I get to 67. Maybe even the majority of my adult life will be spent after age 65. I shouldn't just view that as a winding down period, but maybe I'm not going to be quite as active or sharp or energetic as I was in my 50s. Maybe I've discharged a lot of my responsibilities that I needed to take care of in my life. What do I want to do with that now long third chapter that I have in my life? So that's the ethics. The question to do with care and justice, I think that the two diagrams on the left, one of which show you kind of the traditional age distribution, where as you get up the strata, right, starting at, children, that's the largest group in our society, followed by adults, and then middle-aged people get smaller, and then by the time you get up to your 60s, 70s, you're really winnowing the population. Today, it looks much more like a rectangle, right? Many more people surviving much longer. It's actually the case, right, that the strata at middle age is bigger than the number of children in our society. It's a very different kind of society. How do we handle this justly? How do we allow people who are living longer in a larger segment of the population to contribute to society, to not be discriminated against? How do we counter ageism? And it's also an issue of care. They're not going to be as independent as they've been, and they're probably going to have greater needs for care. How do we fairly distribute the provision of care across our society. So those are some of the terms in the title. Do you got another question for me? You want me to keep going? I was going to share more information about the demographics if you want.
You mean demographics? So that's strange. The figure, the one that looks like the pear.
Mm-hmm.
What does that signify?
So,
that looks like not a pear, like a pyramid.
Yeah, pyramid to rectangle, right? So pyramid signifies that there's fewer and fewer
It has a
people
waist.
as they get older, right? And so that's, children 0 to 4, that's the most people, right? Below 15, that's the biggest group. Then you get up into the 20s and 30s, there are fewer people. You get up into the 50s, still fewer people. By the time you get up to the 80s, it's a tiny little sliver of the population, right?
This is like the sliver of the population alive? Or
well, so this is from 1960. And then in 2030, if you look at what it looks like, it's much more like a rectangle, right? And so that's one way of capturing the change. Yes. Well, we became top heavy, might be another way of putting it, right? We have more people who are 60 years or older. It's now another way to put this is in our society, about 17% of the population is 65 or older.
We're aging.
In Japan, it's a third of the population. It's more than twice as many people as it is here. And most people look at Japan and China, which have gotten top heavier than we have, as our future, right? That's where we're headed. Part of that is because, right, as you can see, we're just having fewer children, right? You go back to the beginning of the 20th century and we're having a lot of children. You get into the end of the 20th century, the beginning of the 21st century, and it's just going down, the number of children we're having, right? And so right here's the US with the percentage of the population 65 and older, right? Today it's about 17%. This diagram, it's a little hard to get the precise figure, but that's what the most recent census says. But then going into the end of this century, it's going to double up to 30%. You can see that's already where Japan is pretty much today. So we're going to get to where Japan is. And by the way, Japan, unlike the United States, has universal long-term care insurance, right? And so this is
I should move to Japan?
Yes.
They're not going to accept me.
Long-term care covers your care when you're no longer able to care for yourself, not just your medical care, right? Your personal care. If you need help cooking, if you need help cleaning, if you need help showering or with your medicine, etc., long-term care covers that, right? Medicare generally doesn't cover all of that. And so Japan is providing that universally for everyone, but it's very expensive, right? And so that's what the diagram shows on the left. And the thing to notice is it's very expensive overall. It's very expensive per capita as well. And the per capita data is relevant because, right, actually, as Japan gets older, it has fewer people working, more people retired, and so it's even harder to support that long-term care insurance.
May I, I have one question. So, when you say long-term care, do they give you this long-term care in your homes, or do they give you this long-term care when you get admitted into a facility like a nursing home or residential care?
Both.
Because I think that a lot of long-term care in America, the insurance is usually a scam because they want you to be in an assisted care facility before they open their.
Yeah.
supplies.
So the
Which happened with your mom, remember?
Well, it actually wasn't the case with my mom.
Yeah.
So I was just going to point out the case I'm most familiar with is my mother, who has long-term care insurance, and there were, I think, 7 criteria of functional self-care that she had to no longer be able to provide in order to receive long-term care. And for the first year and a half that she was qualified until she fell, she received that care at home, right? And so there was a team of visiting nurses and care providers who came to the home, and they were there maybe 20 hours a week, so not round the clock, but the insurance covered that, provided that. And then she fell and lost mobility, and then it became necessary to no longer provide her care at home. You've been to the home. It doesn't really lend itself to someone in a wheelchair navigating most of the space very well.
Do you think insurance should have given her more time so that she didn't fall? Could that have? No, she fell.
If you remember, she fell. It's totally different scenario because of massive forest fires in Northern California and the need to evacuate quickly because they were in harm's way. I have a question for Michael in the chat, which is about the decline in U.S. life expectancy, and especially among white males. And so I'm just going to answer this very quickly, and really this could be the topic for a long lecture, which I've actually addressed this topic before. There's a whole literature. Ann Case and Angus Deaton at Princeton University have written the most systematic analysis of the increased mortality, decreased life expectancy of white men who are essentially working class and who have been rendered precarious by the deindustrialization of the American economy, and they call this deaths of despair. And so what's causing the decrease in life expectancy among this segment of the population, it's a large segment of the population. It's not only men, it's happening to women. It seems to be fairly homogeneously a white phenomenon. It's not happening to Latinos or African Americans. It's the sense that their life has become so precarious that they have lost social respect and belonging. They've lost the institutional context in which they used to feel productive and valued in terms of work and unions and the social life centering on work and unions, that they are abusing drugs, abusing alcohol, overdosing, succumbing to liver disease, but also, and I think this is important, a lot of heart conditions that seem to be related to high levels of social stress. They just don't feel valued or worthwhile anymore. And we're social creatures. And when that happens to us, we go into a stress response. And Dr. Perez, who asked the question, knows this much better than I do. When the human body goes into a chronic stress state, when we're producing, for instance, cortisol in not just a particular stressful moment, but kind of round the clock because we're constantly feeling social stress, it's really bad for the human body. So yes, there are offsetting trends here. And clearly, the interesting thing to think through is if we didn't have deaths of despair, if we didn't have a substantial portion of our population experiencing a lot of social evaluative threat and then abusing drugs and alcohol to try to self-medicate, and as a result dying younger, the lifespan revolution might still be more pronounced. We might be living even longer.
You mean despite everything, we are still living longer?
Yes, exactly.
Is it all across all age races, or just white people?
Well, so to be as clear as possible, this goes, up and down and sideways a little bit, depending on the year. And so the pandemic has brought life expectancy in the United States down. The deaths of despair brought life expectancy in the United States down, but it brings it down by 6 months or a year for a year, right? The long-term trend, which is what's captured in this diagram on the right, is very clearly moving up, right? And it's very clear in this diagram as well, right? We're just living longer, and let us hope we actually do the things necessary so that fewer people are dying deaths of despair. And there's a lot that needs to be done to address inequality, economic precariousness, access to the kinds of drugs that people are abusing, the opioid epidemic. But if we did all of that, we would be living even longer. But it doesn't mean that we're seriously reversing the lifespan revolution trend. That's a robust, resilient trend. So, do you want me to talk about what I'm reading?
Yes. What you just, the slides that you showed, are those your favorite slides? That was the question, that which one was your favorite slide, and which one, you said that you just spoke about aging, so it was that those graphs were your favorite slides?
So if I've got to choose my favorite slide, I'm going to go way ahead of where I am right now. And so we can come back to all of this if we want to. Yeah. But my favorite slide is this one. And it may
graph.
Yeah, I know.
In some other lifespan.
Look, it's not beautiful. It's not a work of art, but the idea that it conveys is a beautiful idea. And so the slide on the right, and I'm just gonna, parachute in for a second to that idea, is about Alzheimer's, right? And so this is the work of Becca Levy, who's public health professor of epidemiology at Yale University. And the reason that she's trained as a psychologist, that she's at a public health school teaching and studying epidemiology, is because she suggests we have an epidemic of ageism in our society. And I think many of us think getting older and mental decline, those two things are synonymous. And the research I've done, the research that others are doing, which is the original research, my research is just derivative, shows that that's just false. That it's absolutely not true, and that there are aspects of cognitive impairment or decline that come with aging, but there are also aspects of cognitive improvement that come with aging, and that if we do this well, if we manage our aging well, if we're honest with ourselves about what gets stronger and what gets weaker, we can in many respects compensate for the decline in short-term memory, or some of the difficulties we have sometimes with autobiographical memory, and just actually continue to learn, to think well, to remember things. It's not uniformly true, but 5 out of 6 people over 60 have no cognitive impairment. 85% of people in their 70s and 80s have no dementia or Alzheimer's, right? And so the vast majority of us...
I already feel demented. What do you mean? So what age group did you say?
70s and 80s.
Oh, really?
Yes. I think you're using demented in a non-clinical sense, right? Yes.
Forgetfulness starts. They say that dementia is a middle-age problem.
Yeah, well,
That's why I'm giving myself glutathione so I can boost my cognitive capacity.
And some of the biomarkers of Alzheimer's are there by the time you're in your 40s and 50s, and maybe some of the brain processes are triggered. But that gets us to this favorite slide of mine, right? the diagram on the right. And let me just, and maybe you can help me with this a little bit. But there's a marker, a genetic marker for Alzheimer's, right? And so this is a protein allele, a variation in your genes. I think people call it ApoE4, but it's the ApoE E4.
Dr. Perez probably.
Perez.
Dr. Perez would probably know better.
I'm sorry, I missed that because I was talking to Dr. Wayne.
So many doctors weighing in. Yes.
Yes.
Dr. Wayne is a gastroenterologist.
Well, so I was talking about the genetic marker for Alzheimer's, right? Which is the ApoE4 genetic marker. And so what this research by Becca Levy at Yale shows is that actually the propensity to develop Alzheimer's for people with the genetic marker for Alzheimer's is determined, about 3/4 of the propensity is determined by your attitude or belief about aging, not by your genetics, right? And so this is epigenetics, is the gene that predisposes you to have Alzheimer's actually going to be expressed in the way that leads to Alzheimer's, right? And if you look at this diagram, I think the thing that's really interesting here is that the people who have the strong genetic predisposition, right? These are the people most at risk to get Alzheimer's, who have positive age beliefs, are not actually much more likely to get Alzheimer's than the people who don't have the genetic predisposition, but do have positive age beliefs, right? And obviously people with negative age beliefs are much more likely to get Alzheimer's. And that's true even for the people who don't have the genetic marker. And so what this says to me is that this curse, right? My grandfather, when he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, said to me, and it was one of the most bleak things he ever said to me, I just got a death sentence. That was exactly what he said. I think many of us dread aging because we overestimate the likelihood that we're going to lose our cognitive capacity and fail to recognize that we have a lot of agency over this. And some of this is, do you put glutathione? Do you take B12? Do you take the lion's mane mushroom that maybe has some neurotrophic properties? But a fair bit of this is actually psychological. Do you view aging as another chapter in your life filled with opportunity? Do you treat it as a time to continue learning and thinking and doing the stuff that matters to you? In which case, you may not suffer from any of the stuff we fear, at least not to a degree that prevents you from functionally doing what you want to do. Let's see. Somebody put. Rosia is saying anti-aging, about just as a general label for all of this. Yes, and so I think one of the things that I come away from in this literature is that we can talk about anti-aging, we can talk about aging well also, right? And so I have gray hair, and that doesn't bother me. I've been following the story online about the newscaster who just got fired in Canada because she let her hair go gray. Obviously, men are less discriminated against when they get gray hair than women. But having said that, the idea that I can get older and maintain my vitality, maintain my relevance, maintain my activity. I think that's also something we need to be fighting for, right? And thinking that age is not a curse, age is an opportunity. So that's my favorite slide, and that's the reason why.
And the thing is that that is so nice that you say that age is an opportunity. But I think that if you do not have agency over the functionality of your system, that opportunity will be kind of lost. It will be so even if and I sometimes feel that people who have the best experiences with as they are older are also people who are healthier.
Oh,
and they do not have disabilities of different kinds ailing them all the time, because aging can be fun if your life is spent from one doctor's waiting room to another doctor's waiting room into a surgeon's biopsy room, and then getting bills and deductibles from 50 different offices and insurance carriers. It's not fun.
So I'm going to tell a little story. There's a woman who comes to my classes every week in person in Yonkers. She's 98, about to turn 99 years old. And when I was giving this lecture, two funny things happened. I was talking about people in their 70s and 80s and 90s, and she said, "You realize when you're talking about people in the 70s and 80s, you're talking about my children. You're not talking about me." And then, but the second thing, when I was talking about being optimistic about aging, at some point she raised her hand and she said, "As far as I'm concerned, that's just all crap." And so this woman is a professional violinist, a woman, one of the first women to play with the New York Philharmonic, and then later in life, when she lost some of her ability to play the more demanding music, she moved over to the New York Pops, which plays a less demanding repertoire of music. And she continued playing professionally with the Pops until she was 90 years old. Right. But at 90, she felt she just couldn't do it anymore. And so part of what she was saying to me is, look, there is some decline. And when the decline happens, it prevents you from doing what you want to do. And it's no fun. Right. And so absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things to be thinking about, we were out with our friend John the other night, and I think you may have noticed John does not drink caffeine and does not eat sweets. John is very vigorous athletically. John is planning to live into his 90s, right? And I think one of the things maybe more of us should be thinking about is, okay, if we're going to go into our 90s, what do we need to be doing in our 50s and 60s to make sure we're still functional in our 90s, right? And there's limits on our ability to do that, but with nutrition and exercise, meditation, stress management, and medical interventions, we should be doing everything we can to maintain our health as long as we can. And so, of course, I have a slide for this.
Oh, really? Another graph.
Yeah. So
graph of the slide.
Yes.
Professor, you must be a mathematician. It can't be that you're just a philosopher.
So the way that Oliver Sacks put this, when he got a terminal cancer diagnosis and he was trying to decide whether to do chemotherapy, he was in his early 80s, and
who is this?
Oliver Sacks is a well-known scientist. He taught at Columbia University. The Anthropologist from Mars is one of his well-known works. Awakenings was made into a movie. Anyway, he's a very gifted scientist who popularized some very important ideas, as well as doing some original scientific work. But when he got that diagnosis, he said to his doctor,
Which diagnosis?
he had terminal cancer.
Okay.
I can't remember what kind of cancer it was. He was married to a man a fair bit younger than him, and the man who's younger than him recounts this in his memoir, that he didn't care as much about the quantity as he did about the quality of his remaining days, right? And that idea, I think, helps to bring into focus this idea of a health span as opposed to a lifespan. And so the diagram at the top, which is from Daniel Levitin's Successful Aging, shows the difference between two people who have equal lifespans. They both live to 100, but one of them spends half their life not healthy. Mm-hmm. One of them spends 2/3 of their life healthy, right? And that although they live the same number of years, obviously the second person is happier than the first person about their extended lifespan. And then the diagram on the bottom right shows that it turns out that we are not just living longer, we're staying healthy for longer in America in the 2010s and 2020s, that into our late 60s, nearly 90% of us stay completely functional in terms of our health. And even into our middle 80s, it's 3/4 of us who stay completely functional. And then if we look at this from a more psychological perspective, how happy are we that we're living longer? And I find this chart, and again, this might be one of my favorite ones. I know you find it funny that I get excited about line graphs, but the graph on the top right asked people in 70 different countries, how would you rank your well-being on a scale of 1 to 9, I think it is. And as you can see, people in their late teens into their 20s are very happy, right? Then by the time you get to your late 20s, less happy, 30s, less happy, 40s, less happy. And then guess what? In your 50s, it reverses, right? And you start getting happier in your 60s, even happier, in your 70s, even happier. And here's the kicker, 82 is the happiest year people report, right? Really? So again, totally counteracts our age stereotypes. People are happier later in life. Yeah.
Because they realize that life is to be celebrated, and they've made peace with themselves.
Yeah, excellent.
And with their...
So there are 3 things people point to in accounting for this. The first is being middle-aged means you have a ton of responsibilities,
of course.
Right? And so
your parents are beating you up, and your kids are beating you up.
Sandwich generation.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like you're just getting screwed from 2 sides.
So that's the first big factor.
60.
Well, it varies for people, right?
Retirement. You're about to retire.
But the second factor is that in your 30s and 40s and 50s, you're kind of focused on the future, building your career, building your social network, getting your degrees, getting your promotions. And so you defer present satisfaction for later satisfaction, right? By the time you get to your 60s and 70s, you're more focused on, hey, let's just enjoy life. And that's sometimes called the dolce vita effect. Life is sweet, right? This is the period where you can actually say, screw it, I don't need to worry.
This reminds me of dolce de leche cake.
Yes.
That is sitting in my... I should ask Dr. Perez to come and have dulce de leche later on.
Tres leches.
Tres leches.
Yes.
Oh, no, it's not dulce de leche.
No, it's tres leches.
Sorry, it's not dulce.
And speaking of tres, there's a third factor here.
Oh.
And this is, I think, also very interesting, maybe especially for you. Yeah. And that is that a lot of older people report, quote, being invisible.
Oh.
People don't look at them. don't pay as much attention to them. And then guess what? You stop caring as much about people looking at you.
Yeah,
and it turns out that that's liberating, that it lets you be freer, not just in the way you present yourself socially, you stop dressing up as much, but also in a sense, it gives you the latitude to do what you want to do, to just be yourself, right? And that leads to happiness as well.
So they let themselves go. And does that mean that, because I admire people who don't care what somebody else thinks of them or whether somebody pays them attention or not. But does this, are you saying that moment when people stop caring what somebody else will say, and does it coincide with the fact that they also let themselves go? But it depends. Is that happiness, letting go? Maybe, in some life, at some point, letting go is what you gotta do. But does it make you happy? It would make me very unhappy to let go of life.
Well, so let's go back to John, who we've seen a couple times this week, and so John has been very successful, as you know, and
he's a multi-gazillionaire.
So he retired in his late 40s because he and it's not as if he leads a especially modest lifestyle, but he had enough money.
I had this much money, I would have had a plane, private plane.
So anyway,
private plane, and what else?
So John, as you know, basically wears his hair very short and wears very casual clothes. Yes. As far as I can tell, at least when he's out with us, he doesn't care very much what the rest of the world thinks about him in terms of how he looks.
He has some really nice badges on his
collar. Yes, he's got
he's
nice
a French citizen. He's
Maltese. Yes, Canadian and American. But here's the point. In addition to
his signage and symbolism is very understated. I totally grant.
Yes, so he doesn't care very much what the world thinks about him, and even those little badges are kind of jokes. But having said that, he takes really good care of himself, right? He bikes every day. He watches his diet. He hikes. He backpacks. He skis, and so I don't think. I think there's a difference between no longer caring as much about how you present to other people, but also maintaining yourself physically, maintaining yourself mentally, maintaining yourself psychologically. If you let all of that stuff go, then no, you're defeated. Right. But if you can say, look, the world's not looking at me as much anymore. And that gives me freedom to do the stuff that matters to me and not care as much about performing for others. That's liberating.
Celebrities go through that, even after being so famous and being recognized and being seen, and then at some point they have to fade out. And sometimes, even when they're fading out, they want to remain anonymous. Sometimes, but that doesn't mean that they stop caring about themselves.
Yes. I'm going to resist talking about Madonna. So
please talk about Madonna.
No.
Why? It is Sunday Salon. We can take a break.
No, I'm sorry I even mentioned it.
Madonna. No, we will talk about Madonna, and the second one was Rihanna. The halftime of Rihanna.
I loved the halftime of Rihanna. I loved the aesthetics of it. I thought it was very cool, dancing in the air, and then the way she was surrounded exclusively by men. It was a very different.
It was a sperm chasing an egg.
That was a sperm chasing an egg. Thank you for clarifying that for me.
Yes.
But I do know that sperms are white. Are eggs that
Red?
color of red?
Well, that was a Valentine's Day kind of thing.
But I also
it was chasing your heart,
love
chasing a piece of blood.
The idea of somebody performing at the halftime of the Super Bowl who's pregnant. You know, I mean, it's not a disability. It's very similar to what we're saying about aging. It's an opportunity. It's a different stage in life. It shouldn't restrict you. And so good for her for going out there and giving us a great show while she's a few months pregnant.
I am so amazed at her. I was looking at Instagram, and I actually shared it as a story today earlier in the morning, where she was practicing these dances, because these stages were floating up and down.
Yeah.
So she was, while pregnant, she was like tied to something in the back, and she was doing all these
dance moves,
amazing moves and there going up and down.
There were no barriers, right? There weren't safety rails. There weren't fences. She was on a transparent, presumably piece of glass or something, suspended hundreds of feet in the air. She, thank goodness, had a safety harness, and thank goodness she didn't need it, right?
Yeah.
But having said that, I think it was a really courageous thing to do. I don't think you or I would necessarily have the nerve to dance on that kind of suspended platform, hundreds of feet in the air. Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Well, I don't dance in public.
Listen, leave it to a pregnant woman to get shit done.
Yeah. Well, we have gone for an hour now.
Very nice. Oh, so my other question was was that the only slide? What was the most interesting thing you did last week?
Most interesting thing I did last week was what I did with you and John last night, which was to go to the Met Museum. And
what was your best favorite picture? One picture.
That's impossible.
Top two.
Well, so we saw an exhibit of 19th century Danish painting that focused on light and realism and idealism. Actually, right, we were having fun with the slides here. That portrait of the men with the long pipes and the peculiar hats, that's actually from that exhibit, right? Basically, so there are two things about this experience, right? The Met Museum for me, and I think for you, we were talking about this last night, is like going to an amusement park. It's just ride after ride after ride after ride. What's your favorite ride at Disneyland or World or Six Flags? I don't know. I like them all, right?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and so there's so much art, so much creativity, so much to drink in and be stimulated about and to think about. So you know, I'm not going to say what my favorite piece of art is, but that experience makes me feel so alive and so greedy to keep going with it. And then we were doing it with one of our good old friends who doesn't come to town that often, right? And who really loves this stuff too. And so we were having fun conversations with him about the art. And so it put me in a space I love with people I love. That was definitely my favorite experience of the week.
For sure, I'm going to, so I have a lot of and I'm going to, when we post this information later on, I am actually going to post some of your footage where you and John are kind of checking out the works of art. What did you think about that African American art stuff that we saw, Was
Well,
that more
it's not.
contemporary?
It's
What
not
was it? It was
really.
outside. It was called like Emancipation. Was it? And then
Well,
I have to look at it.
so it's a French 19th century sculptor who sculpted a bust called "Why Born Enslaved?" Right?
I see.
Question mark,
Fictions
exclamation
of
mark.
Emancipation.
Fictions of Emancipation is the name of the overall exhibit. It was primarily 19th century, primarily French, and primarily sculptural, although there was some Kara Walker and some just a couple pieces of contemporary stuff to be in dialogue with the 19th century stuff. So, but it was about the representation of slavery, the representation of bondage, the representation of emancipation, but more broadly, the representation of race and colonialism and the kind of European construction of the rest of the world. I enjoyed that exhibit. It wasn't my favorite exhibit of our time. Intellectually, I think it's very important, and it led me to, and you may remember talking with John about this, to see some other pieces of art in a different light, because I hadn't thought as much about that issue. But I do have to say, the focus of that exhibit was one sculpture, right? And it's not my favorite sculpture, right? And so while intellectually I think it's extremely interesting and important, and I'm glad I went, it wasn't my favorite art of the night.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love the Met also. I've come to love it more as I'm understanding it more. But I do think that it is a very important tool to not get burnt out. And I think that I will advise it to doctors who might because I think that a lot of physicians who are experiencing burnout, I really felt that place gives you a different kind of information.
Yeah.
A different kind of suffering.
Yeah, no, I mean, and so there are many different ways of looking at the world. And part of what's so fascinating, I hope it's going to work out, that we're going to be able to see the Vermeer exhibit in Amsterdam.
I'm going to do a tour guide. You're going to be the tour guide, and I will record it for whoever wants to come that day. I'm sure that if I start telling people in advance, it will happen.
Yeah,
if we get access.
If we get access, and so we're going to a conference in Prague in May, and so we're going to try to get to Amsterdam and see the Vermeer. But all of that to say, Vermeer's almost photographic precision, but also his use of allegory to convey morality plays in everyday life is so different from, say, what we're seeing here with either the caricature of the English coffee house or the stylized bohemianism of the Danish artists in Rome, right? Or the French aristocratic women who are, suffused with luxury, right? Three different ways of looking at the world, and seeing how we look at the world, seeing how we construct different vantages onto the world, and just the sheer beauty, the constant way in which it calls forth your creativity and intelligence to be in dialogue with these works. Yeah, I love that. And I love reading and I love teaching.
How do you think AI is going to affect that? So the other question was, my last but not least, what was your favorite news this last week? Only last week. It's not like before or after. And then what do you think about the AI's impact on human-made art? Because right now, I heard that AI can just draw whatever you tell it to.
Well, okay. Favorite news from the last week, and it's going to be kind of a curveball because it's not related to anything we're talking about.
Yeah, sure.
So they got a submersible underneath the Thwaite Glacier in Antarctica, which is sometimes referred to as the Doomsday Glacier, because if it melts, it then releases this vast ice sheet to have no impediment going into the Antarctic Sea, and it's going to cause a vast reduction in Antarctic polar ice cover and a significant increase in sea rise. When they got underneath the glacier, they found some stuff that was encouraging. And so that there's a kind of cushion of water that's keeping some of the warm water from getting up under the glacier. And so I just think that's really, really important in terms of maybe giving us just a little bit of a lifeline. And then maybe even if we can figure out how to enhance that effect, we can maybe preserve the Arctic and Antarctic ice caps a little bit better while we get our crap together with global climate change.
And can you please also, thank you. That was a climate change lecture, which will be at some point, we're going to get your favorite climate change. Let's do that next week. And I'll tell Rocio to put it as a question for next week, that, where your favorite climate change slides. And most likely there will be more graphs and more graphs. But I am sure that there'll be some horrific pictures also that will make our hair stand. And then the other question is, please tell us something, your views about ChatGPT, especially yesterday it was on the front of New York Times. It felt like a stalker chasing a married man.
Yeah, I
wow.
think that was the Bing version of this, if I have it right. And
so Bing is like a stalker?
So Bing has a new chat feature. Was it Bing or was it Google? Maybe it was the Google version of this. I to be honest,
Bing is Microsoft.
Yeah. So yes, it fell down a very dark rabbit hole, right? It tried to convince the technology correspondent of the Times that it was in love with him and that he should leave his wife and that he wasn't happy in his marriage, and so it's bizarre, right? I mean, I'm not up
Do you
to
think
speed
it's a
and expert
sitting somewhere talking to them?
No. I think it's quite clearly artificial intelligence, machine learning. It's not programmed by us. It's just figuring out how to do this itself, but it's doing it not in the way that we do things, right? And so we had conversations with John about this again this week, and the idea that you and I construct what we say, what we think, what we do from a perspective that reflects our life experiences, but also how we've distilled those experiences into values and commitments and ideas that we attach priority to. And so, right, these different artistic images on the screen here, why were they painted that way, right? And I think that what, the best versions of AI intelligence can do is you can say, paint a picture of a Ford Mustang in the way that Pablo Picasso would have painted it when he was in his blue period. And it can take that and it can do that for you, right? But having said that, it doesn't have its own evaluative perspective, so far as I understand. And so it depended on Picasso
Hmm.
actually going through a blue period. And why did Picasso go through a blue period? I don't want to say it's just because he sat around and thought about what was my perspective, but because he had certain experiences, friends dying, other things in his life, it led him to evaluate the world from a certain perspective. And I don't think that artificial intelligence, as far as I understand it, is doing that, right? And so I think that we should welcome artificial intelligence, and we should welcome it, especially if it allows us to have greater epistemic diversity, other ways of knowing things, helps us to see maybe some of the limits of the ways in which we think. But I'm not threatened. I don't think it's doing what we do. That doesn't mean that it won't necessarily take away a lot of jobs. I do think that that's a real possibility, and we should be worried about that. You know, we should be figuring out what to do about it. But in terms of it like outthinking me, you know, no doubt plays chess better than I am. I can. It probably reads X-rays much better than you can, right? But having said that, I don't think it's going to be the next Toni Morrison, the next revolutionary artist who writes literature that reveals new ways of looking at them. That in a sense that takes something still uniquely human to do that. So at least with regards to the arts, with regards to creativity, with regards to evaluation.
You think AI never become sentient?
What does sentient mean?
Like a human, like humanoid?
So
can human consciousness meld with AI at some point?
It's
melding, they're taking all our information.
Yeah, I suspect AI will become sentient. If by that we mean that it has some capacity for affect, for emotion, for not just thinking, but for feeling about what it thinks and what other people think about it. But having said that, I'm not sure that its sentience is going to be like human sentience. And it does, in fact, I think, give us some grounds for ethical concern because, you know, we were talking last night about animals and factory agriculture and how awful we are to creatures that we absolutely know are sentient, right? If AI becomes sentient, I doubt
like chicken for them.
I don't. No. The opposite. They're like chicken for us. I don't think that's going to keep us from abusing it.
Like we will be abusing AI also. Like AI won't abuse us. We will abuse it.
Well, I mean, that's the nightmare sci-fi scenario. Based on.
Emma saw Megan yesterday, and she said that it was just a routine AI horror movie.
Yes, a routine AI horror.
I was like, what is a routine AI horror?
Having said all of that, you know, is there any precedent for artificial intelligence abusing us? You know, you might say that's what social media does to us, you know, Twitter poisoning, etc. But having said that, I think that's much more us abusing us for profit, using social media as the medium through which to abuse each other and abuse ourselves. Is there any precedent for us abusing sentient creatures? We do it millions of times a day.
Yeah.
Right. So the much more likely scenario, I think, is we're going to abuse AI than AI is going to abuse us.
You mean AI will become our friend? Toby? AI will be
All right, everybody.
Okay.
This was fun. Looking forward to future salons. Thanks to those of you who stopped by. Do appreciate it. And to be continued. We will do this
Next
again
week.
soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Transvestite, because in 1968 we didn't have the hormone therapies and stuff.
I see.
That